So dating all the way back to the 8th century, Christians have been setting aside one day each year, typically on the first Sunday of November, to remember the saints, those that have gone before them, those that they have loved and they have lost. Typically, we call this All Saints Sunday. Sometimes we refer to it as the Feast of All Saints. But no matter what you call it, it's a day in which we remember that those that have gone before us, that now dwell with God beyond and before us. We remember our teachers, our friends, our guides, people who were artists and theologians, who were doctors and accountants and teachers, nurses, lawyers, architects, people that were mothers, fathers, siblings, spouses, children. Today we remember them. And we give thanks for their lives and for the way that their lives impacted our lives. There's a theologian this last week who wrote that our thanksgiving to God on All Saints' Day is an act of faith. The text that we're going to be looking at this morning is from the book of Revelation to John. And to be honest with you, it's one that I don't preach on often. In fact, in the nearly 7 years that I've been here as your pastor, I believe this is the first time I've ever preached from the Revelation of John. And part of that is because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it's about. There's some confusion about this book and maybe even some fear. It's important for us to remember that this entire book is told as a first-person narrative. And it is part metaphor, it's part political commentary of the day, it's part hyperbole, it's part prophecy. Now, the author is someone by the name of John of Patmos, and he was said to be an exiled prophet, one who was in touch with the world, but also in deep connection with God. And he says in the very first paragraph that this book is a revelation. It's a vision told through this John the Patmos, through his lens. It is an unfolding of God's future. Therefore, it's important for us to remember that it is a vision, not the future. God is the only one who unfolds the future, who knows what the days ahead will look like. Our role as people of faith is to determine what this revelation, what this vision has to do with God's showing up in our present circumstances. And as these metaphors are from the 1st and 2nd century, I would argue that we can still read them into our lives through this revelation of John. So I invite you to hear this word that comes at the very end of this revelation, in which he says John's vision of what the future will hold.
The scripture is from the book of Revelation, the 21st chapter, verses 1 through the middle of verse 6. I'm reading in the New Revised Standard Version, the vision of John. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his people. God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the former things have passed away." And the one who was seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." He also said, "Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true." And then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end." Here ends the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So a few weeks ago, I was preparing to officiate at a memorial service, a grade 5 service, and in my preparation, I came across a poem by a gentleman by the name of Ted Kooser. I'm not familiar with Kooser's work other than this poem that I stumbled upon, but this vision of Kooser Did I pronounce your name right, Ted? This vision came true later that afternoon at the graveside service. And I would argue, too, that this vision comes true even as we are gathered today. The poem is entitled Mourners, and it goes like this. After the funeral, the mourners gather under the rustling churchyard maples, and they talk softly like clusters of leaves. White shirt cuffs and collars flash in the shade in highlights on deep green water. They came this afternoon to say goodbye, but now they keep saying hello and hello, peering into each other's faces, slow to let go of one another's hands. I see that a lot in the work that we do together. As we do church together, as we do life together, that there are a lot of people peering into one another's faces, slow to let go of one another's hands. And I believe, at least in part because I have seen it, that God can do something new in that. In the peering into each other's faces and the being slow to let go of one another's hands, that God can do something new in that. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, John writes. The beauty of this final passage of the Revelation of John is that God is doing something new. That God is doing something new, and as God was doing something new in John's vision some 19 centuries ago, I would argue that God continues to do something new today. Things beyond our imagination, beyond even our own awareness. And in this new thing that God is doing, there will be no tears, there will be no death, there will be no sorrow, there will be no crying, there will be no pain. It'll be a new heaven, a new earth, a renewed you, and a renewed me. I believe that that's why this text is also important on this All Saints Sunday, because we all gather today with our own grief, our own sense of loss, maybe even coming to sense of our own mortality, recognizing the one life that we owe is our own. On the back of your bulletin is a list of all of the names that we have lost in this congregation in the last year. And as I looked at that list earlier this week, I was struck by how many giants we have lost this year. Some of them are people in this congregation. Some of them are friends and family of people that we have lost, including my own mother-in-law. And some of us will look at that list and we will know pretty much all of the names. And some of us may only recognize one or two, may not recognize any of them. But some of them will cause a lump in our throat, a longing in our hearts. Still, others that maybe you have lost years ago. But their memory you just can't shake. And to be honest with you, you don't want to shake their memory. You want to hold those memories sacred. And maybe it's a spouse whose absence now causes you to recognize that the love has been there all along. Maybe it's a parent that taught you more than you ever realized, that you see now only in hindsight how they loved you into being. Maybe it's a son or a daughter, a grandchild. And now, even now, when you hear the laughter of children, it fills you with joy and with sorrow, even at the same time. There is something sacred, there is something holy about those memories, those little vignettes that remind us that some small segment of our lives that we have been loved by other people, and at that same time we have been loved for them. And I suspect that if I were to ask you about some of the saints in your life, that you could go on and on and on. You could tell me story after story about how they shaped you, about how they helped you become who you are. That they were a part of the new thing that God was doing in your life at that time, and that God continues to do a new thing in you and through you today. In the Old Testament, Moses encounters God in a burning bush. And the first question that Moses asks is, what's your name? What do I call you? In the Christian Bibles, the translation often reads that God's response was, I am who I am. But if you look at the original Hebrew, the verb was not a present tense, but a future tense. And so the rabbis would say that a better way to translate that passage is, I will be what I will be. That it's all ahead of us. The Apostle Paul gets this forward-looking idea when describing his own life. He says, forgetting what lies behind, straining towards what lies ahead. If you were here on Easter, you may remember the story of Mary going to the empty tomb. Not knowing it was empty at the time, she encounters a man that she thought was a gardener. But that man tells her that Christ is ahead of her, not stuck in her memories. What that means to me is that God continues to be out there ahead of us, drawing us into the future, that God is doing a new thing. Rob Bell refers to this as the divine pull, that God is continually pulling us forward in life into a new day, a new tomorrow, that God is doing a new thing. Sometimes what feels like an ending is just a beginning. So this week when I received the bulletin to proofread, the first names that I saw that caught my eye, that jumped off the page at me, was that of Judson and Lindsay and Zach McElroy. In a few weeks, it will have been a year since that horrific accident that took their life. And even now, just seeing their names, it took my breath away. And a year later, many of us, and I put my name in that own category, that many of us are still overwhelmed with grief, both individually and collectively. And what I've come to see even more clearly almost a year later is that none of us will go back. If we knew them, none of us will go back to who we were before that tragedy. That life is forever changed. But still we go forward. And as we go forward, we can choose to live in the love of God, to live in the hope that is God, the God that knows us by name, that knows us by need, who loves us more than we can ever mess up. And we can choose to share that love with compassion, with conviction, with power, because God's love will not let us go. You know, one of the great learnings in this world, what I've discovered in almost 30 years of ministry, is that while death may end a life, it does not end the relationship. And that relationship and that life can continue on in the way that we embody who they were, what they taught us, the way that they loved us, and allow that to carry us into a new tomorrow. I know those people whose memories that you hold sacred this morning, I know that they are missed. They are missed today and they will be missed tomorrow, but the grief that we feel even now is only a sign of how much we love them. As I share with just about every person I walk through in a memorial service, that grief is it's a natural expression of the love and the loss. And on this All Saints Sunday, we would be well served to remember that the goodness that they gave us, those things that they gave us, will continue to live on in the lives of those they loved. That those qualities of their life, those things that we loved about them, all of the gifts that they gave us are now our gifts to give away. And in the way that we give away those gifts that they gave to us, they will continue to be a part of who we are and forever will be. That they will live on in us and through us. Because sometimes what feels like an ending is just a beginning. You know, I think sometimes we make the mistake. We make the mistake of assuming that you have to be dead in order to be a saint. Now, granted, in the Catholic Church, that is a requirement of the canonization process, but those of us who aren't Catholic, we can recognize that there are saints all around us. There are saints all around us, even here this morning. If you look around right now into the faces that you encounter, the hands that you are slow to let go, that there are saints all over the place. People that will weep with us when we weep, will rejoice with us when we rejoice. And we have all of these incredible examples. Just look around, all of these incredible examples that teach us what it means to be people of faith. To live lives of compassion and kindness, generosity, gratitude. They are the ones that are peering into our faces, slow to let go of our hands. And God can do something new in that. Sometimes what feels like an end is also a beginning. Because even in the midst of loss, God is doing a new thing.